Pokémon is one of the most successful anime franchises in the world, valued today at $92.1 billion. It all started with a boy who spent his free time collecting insects and tadpoles with his friends. That boy, Satoshi Tajiri, loved the creatures so much that his friends began calling him Dr. Bug. When it came to bugs, Tajiri wanted to catch them all, which gave him an idea for a game that would inspire other children to explore creatures in the same way he did. Tajiri had a vision, but companies like Nintendo rejected his ideas. Despite its initial rejection, Pokémon would go on to be an international sensation and change the video game industry forever. This is the story of how a child with a fascination for bugs went on to create the most successful video game franchise of all time. Satoshi Tajiri was born on August 28, 1965 in the suburbs of Mashita, Tokyo. His dad was a Nissan salesman and his mom was a housewife. As a young adult, Tajiri spent his days exploring the rural landscape near his suburbs. It was here that he grew an appreciation for the insects and critters that lived around him. As a child, he wanted to be an entomologist when he was older so he could continue the study of these creatures. His friends called him Dr. Bug because he truly loved insects. As he grew older, he grew a love for arcade games like Space Invaders. He was introduced to the world of video games, and he was instantly hooked. Much to his parents' disappointment, he began skipping classes to play video games. He spent so much of his time playing games that he rarely spent time on his school studies. This resulted in him often cutting class, and he almost didn't graduate high school. He played the game Space Invaders so much that an arcade actually gave him a Space Invaders machine to take home for himself. Video games were his entire life, and after he graduated, he enrolled in a 2-year program at the Tokyo National College of Technology, where he would study electronics and computer science. Tajiri was so interested in the game Space Invaders that he decided he wanted to make a sequel to the game. He began planning out some ideas for video games of his own. He took apart his Nintendo Famicom and reassembled it so he could better understand how the machines worked. It would be his imagination that would bring him a new career in design. Tajiri teamed up with some friends to create a gaming magazine called Game Freak. In Game Freak, Tajiri talked about cheat codes and strategy and shared with his readers his love for all things video games. 4 years after the creation of Game Freak, Tajiri and his close friend Ken Sugimori shifted their plans for the magazine. Instead of just writing about video games, the pair wanted to begin making games of their own. They started by making puzzle games, but unfortunately, no major gaming companies would take a chance on two unknowns. The Game Freak team refused to give up, and they continued to create new games. A breakthrough happened for them when they were allowed to work directly with Nintendo on a game called Yoshi. This opened a huge door for Game Freak. They continued to establish a relationship with Nintendo and make smaller games for them. This helped Tajiri create a bond with Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, and Gunpei Yokoi, the inventor of the Game Boy. What Nintendo didn't know was that Game Freak had a secret, massive project in the works behind the scenes. Tajiri wanted to create a game that was an entirely original idea and something unique and creative. At the time, the Game Boy was very popular, and inspiration struck Tajiri when he was playing on his Game Boy. When he was playing, he imagined a bug crawling up the Game Boy's twisting link cable. He thought back to his childhood passion for insects and immediately felt that he had a genius idea. He used inspiration from his childhood of bug collecting to create a concept of a game based on collecting creatures. When he first pitched the idea, the heads at Nintendo were not confident it would succeed. Miraculously for Tajiri, the executives agreed to let him begin working on the game anyway because of the strong relationship they had built working together. Game Freak began working on their new game, which would be called Pokémon. Making the new game ended up being very difficult for Game Freak to accomplish. They struggled to remain afloat financially, and their computers kept crashing on them. One of their computers crashed and deleted all of the data for their game, including all of the Pokémon creatures and characters. Remarkably, the computer data was able to be restored. Because of its financial situation, Game Freak lost the majority of its staff, and those who stayed had to work for free because the company was so broke. Eventually, the game was ready to be released. Pokémon was released in 2 versions, the red version and the green version to Japanese audiences. The game had a slow start, but news of how fun the game was began to spread through word of mouth. Soon, Pokémon was a huge hit. Pokémon cards soon began being made to capitalize on the success and addictive nature of the game. Pokémon sold millions of copies in Japan before releasing in the United States. Game Freak worried that the game wouldn't succeed in America, but they were incredibly wrong. Pokémon was wildly popular among kids and teens in the United States, and it became clear that Game Freak created more than just a popular game. Pokémon was a pop culture phenomenon. Pokémon had become a huge media franchise. In addition to the hit game, Pokémon cards, merch, and the TV show were incredibly popular worldwide. The game was so popular that it began to concern parents and teachers. Students were prioritizing Pokémon over everything, including eating and schoolwork. This led to the cards being banned on many school properties. Some people even went as far as to claim that Pokémon were demonic and the game was meant to poison youth. This didn't slow down the popularity of the franchise, though, and the release of Pokémon Yellow, Pokémon Snap, Pokémon Stadium, and the first Pokémon movie were all incredibly successful. New games continued to be released, and the fanbase grew as well. It became clear that Pokémon was a force to be reckoned with and was not going anywhere. Because new games were constantly being released, fans never became bored with the game. In 2016, a new game from Pokémon would change everything. Pokémon Go is a game that allows players to catch Pokémon in the real world. This immersive game took the world by storm and was a massive phenomenon. Tajiri's original vision for Pokémon was to give its players the feeling of going out and collecting bugs and critters outside as he had as a child. And now with Pokémon Go, that vision was happening. Fans were exploring the outdoors and using the game to go on real-world adventures with their friends. A month after its launch, Pokémon Go made over $207 million. In the summer of its release, hundreds of millions of people played the game and the reception was incredible. Unfortunately for Pokémon, the summer ending also led to the popularity of the game declining. The hype around the game began to go away when the app didn't improve or add anything new or interesting to it. The following summer, a Pokémon Go Fest was created to bring together fans of the game. Unfortunately, this effect was a disaster because the cell towers couldn't handle the heavy traffic. Pokémon Go was becoming less and less popular. When the COVID-19 pandemic first started shutting things down in the United States, many people were looking for something entertaining to pass the time. Streamers like Jake Paul and Steve Aoki returned to Pokémon as a way of creating content and passing the time. They began buying up boxes of trading cards and opening them live on their streams. These videos helped reignite the popularity of trading cards, and the values of the rare cards went up exponentially. Card collectors are now able to become millionaires off of well-kept cards. COVID-19 brought back the love of the game to so many people who grew up playing it. Today, Pokémon is continuing to release new versions of the game and gain more fans. It is remarkable to know that the largest video game franchise came from one man's vision to create a game similar to his childhood love of bug collecting. All of the difficulties Tajiri had in the beginning stages of Game Freak were worth it. His game, Pokémon, changed the world in an incredibly impressive way and will always be known as one of the greatest video games of all time.